A Divided Mind. The Divided Mind. A book about the epidemic of mind body disorders. As to whether a given set of symptoms represents a structurally induced or a psychosomatic condition. People with physical symptoms such as back pain or gastroesophageal reflux do not consult psychiatrists. One fails to see then how the writers of the DSM can have taken upon themselves the prerogative of deciding that psychosomatic disorders do not exist as they have done in recent editions of that widely consulted reference work. It makes a little sense as it would for dermatologists to arbitrarily decide to render opinions on neurological disorders. Regarding the manual's phrase, demonstrable organic findings, as long ago as 1888, Freud, working with patients with muscular rheumatism, known today as TMS, demonstrated the presence of pain on palpation medical examination by touch, which is surely an organic finding. The disorder is clearly a mind body process with many demonstrable physical signs. The writers of the manual have been unaware of or have simply chosen to ignore the evidence of the existence of psychosomatic disorders like TMS and the common gastrointestinal and allergic disorders described in this book. Historically, my son is on back of me like I'm a boat. Historically, there have been very few people qualified to judge whether a disorder or psychosomatic, and some of the best of them have been unaware of the most common of these conditions, the pain syndromes. As will be seen in Chapter 2, Sigmund Freud described TMS but concluded it was organic. Alfred Adler did not go into detail but stated that many physical symptoms were induced by the brain. That is very important to read again. Alfred Adler did not go into detail but stated that many physical symptoms were induced by the brain. Perhaps the best paper on the subject was Psychogenic Regional Pain alias Hysterical Pain by Dr. Alan Walters, a highly respected Canadian neuropsychiatrist, published in the journal Brain in 1961. Walters described patients with pain that was clearly emotional in origin, but who were not hysterics. As the term was used at the time, it is apparent that he was describing what we now call TMS. Page 41. It would, page 41 of The Divided Mind. It would appear that modern psychiatry has regressed back to the 19th century when the predominant view of mental disorders was that they were either hereditary or due to brain disease. Freud had not yet introduced the idea that psychology, not physiology, was the important factor in mental disorders. So pervasive was the conventional view, however, that even Freud had trouble disavowing it. Now, despite evidence to the contrary, modern psychiatry suggests that the psyche does not induce emotional states like anxiety. Well, let's read that again. Now, despite evidence to the contrary, modern psychiatry suggests that the psyche does not induce emotional states like anxiety and depression and prefers to view them as chemically caused. Back to the old 19th century physiology. Again, albeit in a more sophisticated form, one cannot help but suspect that much of this is simply a repudiation of Freud, which can be dangerous and short sighted. It's true enough that Freud may have been in error about some details, but his basic ideas on the workings and importance of the unconscious are sound. Our experience with TMS makes that crystal clear. In 1895, Joseph Burr and Sigmund Freud published studies on hysteria. It is a fitting bridge between this chapter and the next to mention two of the cases Freud described, for they recapitulate some issues just discussed, including Freud's description of what we now call TMS, his failure to recognize it as psychosomatic, the occurrence of a variety of psychogenic symptoms in one of the cases, and his and Brewer's pioneering concepts on the unconscious. The cases will then be examined in greater detail in Chapter 2. Emmy Von and Elizabeth Von R. Frau Emmy von M was a woman in her early 40s who illustrates a concept suggested earlier that the same psychology may rise to a variety of psychogenic symptoms. First of all, she had emotional symptoms including anxiety, phobias, compulsive behaviors. Okay, so we are on page 41, moving on to 42. We will be back. We are talking about a case study now concerning a woman who had anxiety, phobias, compulsive behaviors. So we're moving on and trying. This book is trying to explain how you think, how your mind can can actually create physical ailing systems when your mind is misfiring and you have certain issues like anxiety, phobias, compulsive behaviors that it really